Take it away. Welcome, everyone, and thank you for joining us on today's edition of COVID-19 Watch. Here, we'll keep you up to speed with economics of the pandemic. Is the Moneyline with Nancy segment. Today, we have a very packed show, so we need to get started. The first half of the program, I will be speaking with the Group Managing Director at Afrinvest. We will be looking at the Nigerian economy in the first half of this year, how far we had fared, or how far we have fared so far from January to June, the first half. We're already in the second half, 2 months in, I guess. What is the outlook? What does it even mean for you as an individual and as a business? So Ike Chioke will be joining me in a bit. The second half of the program, I'll be looking at Code of Ethics. The Code of Ethics report, I think, will be launched by the Institute of Directors. I'll be having the DG as well as the Chief Executive Officer of IOD join me, and the Chairman of the Ethics Committee. That will be the second half of the program. So for our developing stories, our market news, all you need to do is just to follow that ticker bar you're seeing for more news updates. Okay, I think if we're ready, let's get started with our first interview because it's about close to 5 minutes after 11. Okay, I can see Mr. Chioke now. Mr. Chioke, good to see you. It's been a while. How are you doing?
It's good to see you.
Good morning. How is Lagos?
Well, we're all surviving. Thank you very much.
Okay.
It's a bit subdued, obviously, because a lot of people are still working from home, such as myself. But activities has picked up in recent times. Yeah.
You know what? I need to comment on this because I've seen a lot of you that are chief executives were still working from home. And perhaps you are now your own groom makers. You groom yourself. You don't go to the salons anymore. You have a new style now because a lot of you know, are becoming bearded these days, including my husband.
So do you like the new look?
You know, but I think the final say will come from your wife. If she likes it, fantastic.
She's happy with it. Thank you very much.
Good. I just needed to say that because perhaps the barbers are not making money again now, or perhaps they are making more money because they will come to your house if you agree to groom you. That's the business side of it. But anyway, let's go back to business. What word will you use to describe the first half of 2020? Earlier on, I was speaking with my colleague, and I did remember what LeBron James, the basketballer, did say. It was in February. In fact, after Kobe Bryant's death, he did say, in fact, let us just cancel 2020. Who knows that by now we'll still be talking about this. So he says, cancel 2020. For you, what word will you use to describe the first half of this year?
I would say subdued. Subdued. You know, if you remember, we came into the first quarter with a sort of 1.9% growth in GDP, which is lower than the 2.2 we recorded for all of 2019. And that was before COVID hit. Since then, all the indices and all the parameters that we use to measure have obviously come down as a result of the lockdown and the social distancing measures to prevent the spread of COVID-19. So yes, when you look back, I'm sure the numbers when they are released will show that we have contracted. One of the early numbers we've seen is the Purchasing Managers Index, which shows that we are below 50. And there was a sharp contraction, down to below 40 by April, but it's now beginning to increase to just about from 44 to 49, from 42 to 44. So we'd expect that the level of contraction is slowing, but obviously it's still not above 50, which would tell us that the economy is now beginning to expand. So yes, if I look at the first half, I would say it's been a muted and subdued response for the economy as a whole.
Why would you say subdued? Subdued in what sense? Because if you take a look at the first half, of course, it was marred by lockdowns. We are just trying to catch up right now. Why would you really say subdued? I want to understand the totality of that word.
Yeah, subdued because if you think of it, the economic implications of lockdowns and social distancing. Many businesses had to shut. Airlines, hotels, events, all the activities that we do socially, from weddings to, chieftaincy events to, funerals as well, which actually creates a lot of economic impact on the system. Have all had to shut down. So if you think about the profile of the employment in Nigeria, quite a lot of people are in the informal system, and these people have also been massively affected. It's only a handful that are in the formal sector, like in government and companies, that somehow have managed to maintain some level of activity. So when I do say subdued, is actually a very, so I would say, understated way of saying that we're in deep trouble, because a lot hasn't happened. That's what I mean.
Yes, I think I've gotten out what I wanted from you by you saying that we are in deep trouble. So it's just a subtle way of saying that Nigeria is in deep trouble economically. I don't know about otherwise, though.
Yes, we are.
Yes, we
I
are.
mean, if you think about the global economy, we've entered into 2020 with what we call a synchronized contraction. So globally, the world economy is in contraction. Same thing is happening in the advanced economies, in the emerging economies, and sub-Saharan Africa is no different. Sub-Saharan Africa is estimated to contract by minus 3.2% this year, including Nigeria. But if you come closer to home and look at Nigeria, IMF is estimating a contraction of 5.4%. That is contraction in GDP. If you think that GDP was about 146 trillion last year, 5.4% contraction is quite a massive number. It's almost as much again as the total budget for 2020. You can imagine. And the issues on the budget is a separate matter. So when I say it's been a muted and subdued response, we are not really feeling the full impact of the contraction because many business activities have been shut down. This is the middle of August. We're just entering August. Between July and August, a lot of Nigerians will have been traveling abroad, maybe for their summer vacation, on business. Nobody's allowed to travel unless you have residency or you've got valid visas. If you can get on a flight, one of the evacuation flights. But the typical business people who fly to China or Hong Kong or Dubai are not able to go. So that has also constrained the demand on the foreign exchange. If you look at what is happening on the sort of capital market side, we know there's a huge backlog of foreign investors waiting to repatriate their funds, but they can't get access to foreign exchange despite having all the documentation. The airlines are not flying as much, so they are not requiring as much spare parts or payment of repatriation of funds abroad for tickets issued to foreign airlines. So clearly, there is a sort of constricted demand side, but on the supply side, there's not enough. So the activities are somewhat muted, and it sort of masks what is a real deep problem. If we were to go back to normal economic activity, then we'll then realize how bad this year it really is. See what I mean?
Hello YouTubers, welcome to Moneyline with Nancy TV YouTube channel. This is where we provide you with instructive business directions, processes, and guidance to help you assess the right resources to fund your businesses to withstand every form of internal and external shock. You will find here awesome informative videos on business, entrepreneurship, and lifestyle just to help you make informed business and financial decisions. Punch the subscribe button and let us drive you through the world of business. Please follow all our social media platforms on Facebook, on Twitter, on Instagram, on LinkedIn, and follow us for latest updates on our website. Let me have your view about the handling of the health crisis that befell us in, perhaps is it February now, when our first case was confirmed, I think 27th of February, yes.
Yes.
So speak to me about the handling of the health crisis and the lockdowns. I remember I also spoke to you at that early time of the lockdown. I think we spoke whether in April or late March. Yes. So speak to
probably March. Yeah.
Yes. How has your concerns changed? Between that time or now, or is it a bit heightened?
Well, we have never really been prepared on the health side in terms of the basic things we would have to do as a country. So if you compare ourselves, our response, I would say that we are probably 1 or 2 weeks too late when we responded, because by the time we responded, other countries like Rwanda or Ghana had already begun to close their borders. If we had taken an action maybe 1 or 2 weeks earlier, we might have prevented some of the large influx you saw into Lagos, as you saw. But be that as it may, we did respond. The challenge is that, I recall like by March when we did close the borders and close the airspace, we had only about 4 or 5 test centers across the country of 200 million people. If you now fast forward to presently, we have about 60 or 61 across the country. But even the rate of testing and tracing and, all of isolation of cases is still much lower than comparable countries. Ghana is testing about 11 people per 1,000. We are only managing to test about 1 person per 1,000. In South Africa, that ratio is about 40. If you compare us in terms of the number of ICU beds available, South Africa has over 3,500 and we have just under 350. So we've never really been prepared to face a health emergency of this nature, because the elite in Nigeria have always had the advantage of being able to get on a plane and fly abroad and get special treatment to the detriment of the rest of the country. This is the very first time we're all stuck here at the same time, and there's a crisis and they can't go anywhere as easily.
If you take a look at with what you've just said now, that perhaps we responded 2 weeks late, and I've heard a lot of people say that, looking at it now with hindsight, does it really matter when we responded? Because would it have made any difference? I think that's the question. Because if you see those that even responded before us, the South Africans, the Ghanaians, and what have you, I think South Africa has the highest rate right now. In Africa, it's opened schools, it has closed back schools again. So would it have really made any difference? Or was it that Nigeria was also taking a sit down look position? Let me say it the pidgin way so that a few of my viewers can understand what I'm saying.
I think that if you look back over the last 4 months, the difference is not material. But I think what is become clear is that our capacity as a country, which we like to tout ourselves as the giant of Africa, we're actually quite weak. So the ability to organize ourselves, to create test centers, contact tracing, get the results out, you can see is much weaker than our comparable peers. And that is really the challenge. I think that when I look at the response, there has been a lot coming from the top. You have the Presidential Task Force on COVID-19, but I have not seen sufficient momentum at the grassroots. You would have thought that a health pandemic such as what we are facing would have tried to mobilize a lot of people at the grassroots level. So there is sort of a bottom-up approach to get people to understand what is going on. For far too long, many average folks will say that, oh, this is a disease of the elite. They brought it from overseas. It doesn't affect poor people. And even that psychology still pervades still today. If you go to the market, you see easily maybe only 30% are wearing masks and putting themselves in a position where there's appropriate social distancing with other people. So clearly, if you look back and say, okay, 2 weeks is not a big deal over 4.5 months, but if you actually track down the effort, you then see that it's been mixed. I mean, Lagos State has done a credible job, but, there are still a lot of states that are in denial. I don't need to mention names. There are a couple of governors that believe there's no COVID in their states and don't wear masks in public. So there you go. So it's really a worrying situation in my view.
Let me take your own assessment of Nigeria's fiscal responses to combat the twin evils of not just COVID-19 pandemic, then oil price. Just before COVID-19 also hit, we saw the tussle between OPEC Plus, that's some countries in OPEC Plus, Saudi Arabia, perhaps Russia, and all of that. So what's your assessment of Nigeria's fiscal response? Don't forget the IMF also gave us $3.4 billion from the Rapid Finance instrument. There is a 2.3 trillion naira fiscal stimulus plan, the economic sustainability plan. So many others, the CBN launching different interventions. The latest, I think, is the non-interest intervention. That I will explain tomorrow for our viewers, so they should tune in. So speak to me about your assessment.
Well, you know, we started out with half a trillion naira, 500 billion naira fiscal stimulus. But if you then compare that to, say, South Africa again, it only represents 0.4% of our GDP, whereas South Africa was in nearly 7% of their GDP in terms of fiscal stimulus response. So again, the levels are different. Of course, the central bank has come out with its own response, which included like 50 billion for SMEs and households, 100 billion targeted at the healthcare sector, and I think a lot more going to manufacturing. You know, when you think about all of that, the challenge is quite slow. We're fortunate that the oil prices corrected, well, not corrected, due to the issues we saw in OPEC Plus, the Saudi Arabia fighting against Russia, oil price collapse with too much supply in the market. Then that forced the government to adjust the pump price of oil. So we went from 145 naira per liter to about 125. It trended down to 121. But of course, it has come back up again now to 143, because by the time you've made changes to the exchange rate, and oil price has also recovered, you know, from the below 20 to in the 40s, they have to re-index it. So yes, there has been some transfer of stimulus to the ordinary people, but I think it's too slow and too far in between. I still haven't seen enough impact of it on the economy overall, and you know, many businesses are suffering. You know, that's just.
Is it that we are more than what the interventions can resuscitate? Talking about perhaps 41.6 million MSMEs in the country that control about 84% of jobs, 96% of employment. So perhaps what the government is bringing, it's like pouring water into a basket. It will not really, you know, saturate, and you begin to feel the impact. Though the Economic Sustainability Committee did say they went for the 2.3 trillion naira stimulus plan because that is the best to do for now, even though the economy will contract. So is it that we are more than what the government is bringing out?
I think it's just really when you look at the framework that the government is using to actually identify those in need, we have estimated about 20 million poor households in Nigeria. I think our records, the data from government suggests they've registered only 1.2 million poor households. If you talk to somewhere like the Minister of Humanitarian Affairs, their numbers would suggest something different, that they have reached more Nigerians who are in the poverty bracket. But it just feels like that the disbursement has been very slow, and is really not accessible. When you really look at the data, you see they throw numbers at us, but they don't tell us the framework they're using to get to those numbers, and you know, to confirm that indeed this stimulus is getting the people that require it.
Let's take a look at the domestic macroeconomic variables. If you take a look for someone perhaps sitting overseas and want to take a look at Nigeria, just perhaps go on Google and check out how Nigeria is doing, how Nigeria is handling this pandemic. We'll see numbers like inflation ticking up, see Naira depreciated to about 380 that the central bank adjusted, but the parallel markets is trading at over 450. You're taking a look at FX reserves hovering around 35 to 36 billion dollars. Unemployment rate at 23% as at the last count, I think 2018 numbers. So the numbers aren't looking that pretty. What would you tell that person sitting on his computer or her computer and saying, what can I really get from this country? Should I go or should I stay?
I think you should stay. I think, of course, with the kind of population we have, Nigeria remains that massive opportunity waiting to happen. Um, but the numbers, yes, I mean, we've had to correct the exchange rate. And I think that's one of the positive things the monetary authorities have done this time around, move the official rate from 305 to 360. So that was quicker reaction that happened in 2015, if you recall, 2015, 2016, when they held on to the exchange rate and it caused a massive differential. But nonetheless, even at 360, and I do know that effectively they are trading at the NAFEX rate, which is closer to 383, 385, there is still a deluge of demand for foreign exchange, which is not being met, which is why you have the parallel market around the 450 level. So that is a worrying sign. Clearly, a lot of businesses that operate in the formal system are challenged. For those who are able to go between, the official exchange rate, either 380, 360 to 380, and the 450, they can survive. But you can see the recent announcement by ShopRite that they are pulling out of the country. It's just one of the signals. They are not even the first company to pull out. There have been many more that have pulled out quietly without any announcement in the last 6 months. So this underscores the challenge for investors outside of Nigeria thinking of, is this a good time to come in? In my honest opinion, I would advise that they wait a while until the parameters are more positive, and we can discuss that later during the course of this program.
Of course, you're an investment banker. Let's talk about that a bit, because when we're talking about enlarging the investment scope in the country, we also need FDI. You've just talked about ShopRite. The news made rounds yesterday, though ShopRite clarified and did say that it is divesting and not leaving Nigeria, not pulling out. Perhaps it just wants to get in more stakeholders. What would it say for perhaps pulling FDI into Nigeria at this point, even as the whole world is battling the pandemic? Look at ShopRite, for example. I think the company started in 2005. I think they're about 15 years now. ShopRite Nigeria subsidiary did report negative sales growth of about, I think 6% or so, if I'm not mistaken. Yes. Okay. So what does this say for the Nigerian market? I've asked these two questions. The first question, I just want to refresh your mind. The first question is, what will pull FDI into the country? Now, the second question is, what does this say for the Nigerian market, the ShopRite story? Is our market overrated? The Nigerian market, is it overrated? Or is it overvalued? Because people say, oh, Nigeria will have market. Market of what? Market of poor people?
Okay. I think in order to attract foreign direct investment, Nigeria needs to do more on the reform side. They have even something like fuel subsidies, one helpful reform they have, instituted in this period, which is smart because you can see that the pump price has been moving around. It went from 145 to 125 to 121, and it's presently about 143.50. So that is sensible. But there are still many sectors of the economy that have not been touched by reform. The big elephant in the room, the big oil company, I don't want to go there. The aviation sector, the waterways, the Nigerian Ports Authority, Nigerian airports. If we can do more to reform and organize areas that government is holding on to and are holding on to them very badly, with inefficiency, then clearly we then begin to open up the space to attract foreign investment into Nigeria. Importantly as well, one area government has not focused on is to look at the cost of government. When you look at their budget in any day, 80% of that represents recurrent expenditure, which are salaries and overheads. I think it's high time we consider that a budget for 200 million people, you can't take 80% of that and pay only a handful of million people as salaries and overhead because very little is left. Now, going to your second question in terms of the size of the Nigerian market. Yes, it is actually a market of poor people. That is why a ShopRite is challenged, because they are not really able to get the momentum and the transaction flow. But I also suspect that for ShopRite, their challenge could be that they would have a lot of naira stuck in the country and not able to get the foreign exchange, to back it based on, the turnover of their business on a monthly basis or on a quarterly basis, because there will be quite a reasonable level of imported items that come into the store. So in an environment like what we've seen over the last 3 to 4 months, when FX illiquidity has increased, then that could further dampen what was previously an underperforming business. But back to the issue about the poverty incidence in Nigeria. Before pre-COVID, we were talking about approaching 100 million poor people in this country. You can see how that has now become much worse. If we take the same data, I'm sure we're probably now perhaps over half of Nigerians are very, very poor. What do you do with those people? I think the critical thing is for government to realign its investment and really focus on human capital development. I talked a bit earlier about the challenges in the health sector, but if you couple that with the quality of education, and the challenges that COVID-19 has imposed, this is a time for government to consider pivoting and adopting more modern ways, sort of online technology to create online platforms to get more and more people enrolled into school, all the way to the average Nigerian. The training of Nigerians and making sure they are in good health allows us to have quality human capital, which could actually change what is a vicious cycle, as we presently see, into a virtuous cycle. And I can shed more light on that.
Okay, just shed the light on it now as I move over to something else.
So what I mean by that is that, Nigeria's biggest export is not really oil. Nigeria's biggest export is human capital. If you look at the remittances coming from Nigerians in diaspora, if you look at the number of Nigerians that are moving abroad every year to go to a graduate education or just going for greener pastures, you can then see that momentum continues unrelenting. Today with COVID-19, you see now that remote working has taken has become a major phenomenon. I'm sitting comfortably in my living room, in my study, and I'm able to do my work quite effectively. And that affects a lot of people in the professional services spaces, like accountants, lawyers, customer service personnel, digital people like, IT programmers. A lot of people who are in the professional space can sit comfortably where they are and do the work. Now, rather than trying to export Nigerians abroad to go and do the work and remit money home, there's an opportunity today with technology for the government, with focused private sector encouragement, to get Nigerians to stay home and become well-trained and be able to provide the services to foreign companies right from here overseas. People are suffering from what they saw with the challenges of concentrating all their energies in China. And so once COVID-19 came in effect, you could see it disrupted the global supply chain system. Now, people are looking for other sources. So in addition to human capital, which can be trained locally and of sufficient quality to supply, services to America, to Europe, either, providing legal services, accounting services, the term in industry is called business process outsourcing. In addition to that, you can also consider Nigeria, which is actually well located geographically compared to the rest of the world, as a place where we can take a long coastline and start developing, free trade zones that allow global manufacturers to come to Nigeria and manufacture stuff that can be exported back to the rest of the world. And then they can use Nigeria as another platform, for, within their sort of supply chain system. These things require very considered and focused perspectives, I do believe, because when you're in a crisis like this, the most important thing is to realize that if you don't do the right thing, it could get worse. I do recall that people were talking about in 2016, when we were in that recession, which was only a minus 1.6% contraction in GDP, mind you. People were wondering, can it ever get worse? Look at us now in 2020. It has actually gotten worse. And that's because we have always been reluctant to do the right thing. And if you do it, you then come in with the idea of sort of doing too little, too late. And then that found what is already a difficult thing.
Of course, everyone has a consensus that it seems that Nigeria definitely will be in a recession. The question to you right now is there an elegant way to get out of this economic quagmire? You know, you can fall, but the way you also rise, you know, depicts your character, so to speak. You know, would you rise with confidence or would you still rise even though your legs are wobbling and you say, I've got to stand strong? So is there an elegant way for Nigeria to come out of this economic quagmire?
There are ways, and I think that the areas would be sort of, again, to your earlier question, how do we attract investment into the system? But the pundits in Abuja believe that the way to do it is to borrow and borrow and borrow. Unfortunately, we're digging ourselves into serious problems in the years to come. If I just look at just something like the debt indices, we're currently at 27% debt to GDP. And while that looks modest, if you look closer to the revenue size of the government, in 2019, we had 60% debt service to revenue, the whole of 2019. 60% debt service to revenue is at the estimated 4.1 trillion of actual revenue. Forget what they said in the budget. That they recorded, they spent 60% of that on paying back principal and interest on borrowings. Today, our debt numbers are way above 31 trillion naira, including Ways and Means. Ways and Means is money printed by the central bank of about 8.7 trillion. For the first half of the year, actually, the data is up to May, we've seen debt service to GDP at 72%. Debt service to revenue. So it tells you that it's not really sustainable. If we're projecting the number to the end of the year, we could get to 80% debt service to revenue. And you cannot live on borrowed money. And I think it's high time for us to pause, just, press a reset button. And that button means, where can I do reforms? We've been talking about reforms to the, and my voice is hoarse from talking about reforms. So where can we do credible reforms that can attract investments into the country? And not even attract foreign investments. There are a lot of Nigerians that have money in Nigeria who are not willing to spend it because the environment is not ideal to spend it.
So what would you say to people that are of the view that borrowing isn't bad? What you borrow for matters. Then if you take a look at countries like the US, Japan, they have debts to GDP of about 140, 104, over 100%. Nigeria debt to GDP still less than 40%. So
it's 27.
Yeah, so for you to say we can't live on borrowed money, countries like that, developed first world countries, are living on borrowed money. They have reforms. Can we eat our cake and have it? Do everything at the same time?
The flip side is when you look at their debt service to revenue, you see that they are probably in the 10 or 20%. The amount they are paying to service that debt is much lower. In our own case, where I told you we're already at 72% for the first half of this year in terms of debt service to revenue. So the issue is the total revenue size. If you look at the oil receipts and you look at the non-oil receipts, is actually shrinking, despite the fact that they've been increasing the budget notionally every year for the last 5 years. The fact remains that the actual revenues recorded by this government has remained relatively flat at about 4 trillion naira a year for the past 2 or 3 years.
What do you think?
And that's coming from their own data.
What do you think has been the toughest challenge for this administration in the first half of this year? Would you tell me the COVID-19 pandemic?
I think for me, when I look at it, I think perhaps the biggest challenge I see is not really the pandemic. Pandemic just exposed what was really a difficult and operating system that they have. But perhaps the lack of coordination. They have a lot of talented people scattered across the government. But when I hear their pronouncements, there's perhaps not enough coordination to use sort of the best ideas to get the best optimal outcomes for the country. You do find that people who have greater access or influence, their own idea may override others that make more sense or that should come first. And so that's unfortunately what you have in a sort of multi-diverse country, with religious overtones, political overtones, ethnic overtones. And you like to hope that at the seat of government, they could overcome all of those issues and be able to look at things in the most rational and logical way for the country. So I think the biggest problem is coordination.
Coordination. What is the biggest problem that may not be economical that is impacting this administration as well as Nigerians, that is not economical but impacts the economy? I hope you get what I'm saying. The biggest problem that is facing all of us, and no one wants to talk about it, and we all know there are undertones, and is impacting our economy. Is that yes?
In the room?
Yes, the
Is that
elephant in the
corruption?
room. Okay.
It's corruption.
Okay, that's your own assessment. Corruption?
It's corruption that is the biggest problem. And I think the way to solve corruption is, in my view, to stop all this nonsense about making everything in government top secret, in my company, for example, I can't go and, ask, even though I'm the chief executive, I will not be involved in trying to procure, computers for the office. The system we built would make sure that 2 or 3 vendors, and many people will go online and check every imaginable person that can supply that equipment and make sure we get the right price. Now, that is an Afrinvest that has less than 100 requirements of such computers. Now, if a government that needs maybe 100,000 of the same item, they have enough capacity to actually get the manufacturer overseas or in Nigeria to make it for them at even a steeper discount than we would purchase it. But instead, what you then find is they're paying 2 or 3 times the price that is available on the market. So it is a lack of transparency in their procurement systems, and it's a lack of transparency in a lot of the overheads that you see, ESTA code. I mean, I don't even want to mention the NDDC issues. And, it shocks you. It's mind-boggling that in this age and time, these sort of things can happen. And people sort of wave it off and, attempt a feint on national television as a way of escaping. But corruption is really the biggest issue, and we need to talk about it more.
Okay, your firm released the report, I think, Opportunity in a Crisis.
Yeah.
Do you think that Nigeria is making use of this opportunity in a crisis? I think it was Winston Churchill that said something like that many years ago. Never waste an opportunity. Are we using this crisis well?
I've not seen enough.
Are there priorities the government can also focus on? Perhaps it's not even looking at that beyond what we're seeing, beyond the rhetorics and all of that.
Yes, when the whole pain of COVID-19 hitting and the initial lockdown, you saw the great and the good of Nigeria all sort of, announcing massive donations, the COVID fund and all of that. And I thought that's all very well and good for the system to help, support government's effort in this direction. But I think a big health crisis like what we have today is an opportunity to reset the healthcare industry in Nigeria in a way that is sustainable. Clearly, the way we've attempted to respond to COVID is not sustainable. We can't have hospitals in tents, We can't continue to go through drive-through test centers. We need to think of what we do, how we build the appropriate healthcare infrastructure that will support us through COVID-19, or whether it's Ebola, or whether it's Lassa fever, you understand, or whether it's just common measles, or or some of the meningitis we have in the north that recur every year. And there are quite a lot of endemic, infectious diseases that we have. Actually, when I checked, I've been doing a bit of research on that. There are about 45, of which many of them can be dealt with basic things like, clean water supply and sanitation. Can you imagine how simple that is? If you fix the water supply and you fix the sanitation and clean up the environment, you can eradicate easily more than half of the endemic infectious diseases in Nigeria. And I think that a crisis like this should encourage us to say, how do we reset the healthcare infrastructure and the healthcare industry in Nigeria? And looking at our population indices, the concentration of poverty, and what we expect it to be in the future, and building on that framework. And we have to do it using technology in mind, because not everything that you need to sort of send human beings all around. There are people that have mobile phones. But particularly in the educational space, we have to do a whole lot more. because we have human beings. We don't have human capital.
Okay.
And that's a big
okay, Mr. Chioke, just in 30 seconds, what's your outlook for the second half, which we are 2 months in already?
I think it's going to be worse than the first half, because now that we are coming into the second half, we're opening up the economy. Economic activity is going to start. You're going to see a little uptick in inflation. The challenges of getting the foreign exchange will worsen. Yes, IMF and the World Bank have sent us some money, but we're probably going to spend all of that during this Q3, the third quarter of the year, and then leaving us quite exposed towards the last quarter of the year. So we've said IMF is suggesting a 5.4% contraction for the economy in 2020. That is over 3 times the contraction we saw in 2016. Many people are unemployed. It will get a bit worse before it gets better.
Okay, I think we'll leave it at that, but we're starting, at least we are finishing the week. Today is Tuesday. Let's just continue on the hopeful side. Thank you very much. Thank you very much.
It's always a pleasure. Thank you, Nancy.
Thank you, Mr. Chioke, for joining me on the show. All right, that's the much we can take with Mr. Ike Chioke. He's joined me. We've looked at the first half of the year, the economic performance and the outlook for the second half. Let's quickly take a break. When we come back, it will be time for us to begin our second conversation. I'll be looking at IOD, Institute of Directors, and the Code of Ethics thing, the one to launch, I think, tomorrow. Let's quickly take this break. We'll be right back. Thank you for watching our video. Please hit the subscribe button below, turn on post notification to follow all our updates.